So today we're going to spend a few minutes and talk about how to import data into R. This is really important because we're going to be dealing with some data files in R that we're going to use for plotting, for analysis, and different things like that. So the first thing you want to do is get the data, and the data will always be posted on Blackboard. So all you need to do is go over to this tab called Example Data. Open that. You'll notice that there's already a sample data set in there. It's a hypothetical data set where we imagine that a scientist went out and looked at a number of plants and counted the number of aphids on each plant. So if you take a look here and click on this file, aphids.csv, it will open a new window and you can see the number of aphids and the number of plants that were counted. So what we can do is we can right click and save page as, and it will ask us to save it as, we save it as aphids.csv. Make sure that it has that .csv extension and then we can save it. Another way to do it is to right click right on the file and download linked file, and that will download automatically. So I saved my file on the desktop, so I'm going to minimize our Blackboard window, and if you see over here on the right, we have a file called aphids.csv. The .csv file is an Excel file, or a file that Excel can read, so if we double click on that, at least on my computer, the Excel window opens up and you can see that we have two columns. One is n.aphids and the other is n.plants. This is frequency data, so we have the number of aphids counted on a certain number of plants. So for example, there are 3 plants in which 0 aphids were counted. There's one plant where only 1 aphid was counted, one plant where only 2 aphids were counted. And if we look through here, there are 16 plants that had 17 aphids on each. There were 19 plants that had 24 aphids on each, etc. So there's a whole line of data here, and all of the observations. So we can play around with this in Excel if we want, but we're going to import it into R, and then we're going to play around with it in RStudio. So we're going to exit out of this. What we want to do is open RStudio. To import our data, we want to use the import dataset function in RStudio. And so what we're going to do is, if you notice up here on the top right, is this import dataset button. Click on that. And what we want to do is we want to import from text. .csv or .comma separated values are technically text files, but they're read as a spreadsheet by Excel. And so we're going to click on From Text. We're going to go to our desktop, and we're going to click on aphids.csv. And we're going to open it. So what we want to do is we want to make sure the name makes sense. So we call it aphids, because that's the name of the file. You can leave encoding as automatic. Heading, you need to make sure that you keep it as yes. And what that means is that the first row of data is the heading. It's not data. Row names, leave it as automatic. And then separator should be comma because it's a CSV file. The rest of this you can ignore for now. And then we can look here on the right. The input file looks right, and then it shows that we have 2 columns of data, one that's n.aphids, or number of aphids, and the other column is n.plants, which is our number of plants. Then we click import. You notice that there is a command in the R console, aphids read.csv from the source of your aphids, or the source of your file. And then also it has the view command, and so that popped up here on the top left. All of this is great, all of this is in, it's good to go. You can also double check by looking over here on the right, and you see there's aphids, there's 42 observations of 2 variables. If you count the number of rows in your CSV file, you'll notice that there are 43. The first row contains the names of your columns, and then below that are 42 observations. And then, of course, we have 2 columns, so we should have 2 variables. One is n.aphids, the other is n.plants. We can also check that by creating a new R script and then typing aphids and running it. And you can see here in the R console, we have our 2 columns and our 42 observations. This first column are the row names, or the number for each row, and the data starts on the second column and this third column. And that is how you import data into R.